This was supposed to be the season that saved Formula One. Closer racing, cleaner technology, a grid where anyone could win. Instead, the title leader's biggest rival died on the grid in Monaco before he turned a wheel. A car ran out of battery mid-race and parked. And the sport had to disable the very systems it spent 4 years designing just to survive its most famous Sunday. The new rules were meant to fix everything. So why is everyone, from the drivers to the FIA itself, already trying to replace them? 6 rounds into the 2026 season, the sport that promised a revolution is quietly coming apart. And Monaco is where it all came to a head. Monaco is supposed to be the jewel. The race every driver dreams of winning. The slowest and tightest circuit on the calendar, where precision matters more than horsepower, and one mistake puts you straight into the barrier. It is the one weekend a year when the whole world tunes in, even people who never watch Formula One, which is exactly why what happened there matters so much. If the new era was ever going to look good, it was meant to look good here. It did the opposite. Sunday the 7th of June, round 6 of 22, 78 laps around the most famous stretch of road in motorsport. By the time the checkered flag fell, the race was barely recognizable as a Grand Prix. It started before the race even did. Max Verstappen never made the first corner. The 4-time world champion had qualified second, right on the front row, within a few hundredths of pole, one of the favourites for the win. The lights went out, and his car simply did not move. The engine, in his own words, just dropped dead. The rest of the grid streamed past him into the first corner while his Red Bull sat there, useless. His team boss Laurent Mekies confirmed the problem had developed on the formation lap. Out on lap 1, from the front row, at the biggest race of the year, his 3rd retirement of the season. It was also the 3rd time this year a start had gone wrong underneath him, after trouble in Australia and in China. That is not bad luck anymore, that is a pattern. These engines have to rev hard on the formation lap to spool the turbo and bank energy into the battery, and that start procedure has been fragile all season. Before the year even began, McLaren's Andrea Stella warned that the new starts were a safety risk. He was right. When the best driver of his generation cannot reliably get off the line, the problem is not the driver. And Verstappen was only the first to fall. Around lap 45, Lando Norris coasted to a halt. His radio said everything. No power, no battery. His 2nd power unit failure in 2 races, on a car that is otherwise the fastest thing on the grid. This is the exact nightmare everyone saw coming with these engines. They lean so hard on electrical energy that when the system lets go, there is nothing left to carry the car home. 2 of the biggest names in the sport gone to power unit problems on the same afternoon. 2 different teams, 2 different failures, the same underlying weakness. Remember where this is happening. Monaco is the gentlest race of the year on an engine, the lowest top speeds, the least time at full throttle, the easiest weekend a power unit will ever have. If these engines are failing here, of all places, that tells you how stretched the new systems already are. Then the walls started claiming people. Valtteri Bottas cooked his brakes and pulled off. Oliver Bearman was gone. Then, with around 20 laps to run, Lance Stroll crashed at the final corner and brought out the safety car. At the restart, Charles Leclerc crashed at the very same corner. Ferrari's home hero, the one driver every fan in the Monaco grandstands had come to see, into the barriers and out of his own Grand Prix. 2 cars, 1 corner, 7 laps apart. Stroll pointed straight at the car, blaming engine braking, the same complaint Isaac Hadjar had been making all weekend. Under these rules, when the battery cannot recharge, drivers lose engine braking on the way into a corner, and the car goes light and nervous at the worst possible moment. On entry, with a barrier waiting on the exit. On a normal circuit, that is a handling gripe. In Monaco, it is a crash. And this is the cruel part. Monaco punishes a car that is nervous on entry more than anywhere in the world. There is no runoff to save you, no space to bleed off a mistake, just steel barriers a few feet from the racing line. A car that drivers cannot fully trust under braking is the last thing you want here. These rules handed them one anyway. By lap 68 of 78, the race had to be stopped completely. Not for a crash this time, but because the track surface itself was breaking apart at turn 19. Workers were out repairing tarmac in the middle of the Monaco Grand Prix. 37 minutes under red flag, a second standing restart. And then the result itself descended into farce. A wave of pit lane speeding penalties hit 5 different drivers after the flag, several of them for being over the limit by as little as 1/10 of a kilometre per hour. Pierre Gasly had crossed the line 3rd, on course for a shock podium. 2 of those penalties dropped him to 7th. George Russell served his wrong, picked up a drive-through, and fell out of the points completely. Carlos Sainz collected damage in the chaos and joined the long list of retirements. The race you watched and the result that counted were two different things. Added up. 7 cars gone, a car dead on the grid, a car out of battery, crashes, a disintegrating track, a 37-minute stoppage, and penalties raining down after the finish. The most glamorous race on the calendar, reduced to a survival exercise. Through all of it, one car barely put a wheel wrong. We will come back to that, because it matters more than it first looks. And here is the part that should stop every Formula One fan cold. The most damning thing about Monaco was not any of the crashes. It was a decision the sport quietly made before a single car turned a wheel. Formula One switched off its own flagship technology. Active Aero, the moving wings that are supposed to define this entire era of car, were disabled completely at Monaco. Not limited. Off. The reasoning was safety. The system needs a straight long enough to justify activating it, and Monaco does not have one. The speeds coming out of the tunnel, with so little runoff, were judged too dangerous. So for the first time in 2026, the cars ran locked in their high downforce setting for the entire lap. Sit with what that means. This was the first time movable wings of any kind were unavailable in Formula One since the drag reduction system arrived back in 2011. The single most marketed feature of these new cars could not be trusted to run safely at the sport's most prestigious event. Think about how strange that is. Formula One spent 4 years telling everyone these moving wings were the centerpiece of the new era, the clever part, the thing that would make the racing closer. And at the one race guaranteed the biggest global audience of the year, the sport looked at its own creation and decided it was too dangerous to switch on. Not tuned down, not limited to a single zone, completely disabled. It did not stop there. The battery was muzzled too. Through a special Monaco engine map, the cars cut their electrical deployment far earlier than normal, pulling the electric assistance away by the time they reached 300 km per hour, all to keep the energy under control on a circuit with no room for error. So the great 2026 package, the hybrid power and the active aero you are told is the future of the sport, was quietly dialed down just to get through Sunday. Read that one more time. The sport did not adapt the circuit to suit the cars. It adapted the cars away from their own rules, because the rules as written could not safely handle Monaco. Here is the irony nobody wants to say out loud. With the technology turned down, the racing on Saturday was some of the best of the year. Look at qualifying, because Saturday told a completely different story to Sunday. Around a circuit where the cars were finally allowed to be raw, the aero locked down and the energy rained in, the drivers went out and produced the kind of session Monaco is famous for. Antonelli took pole with a lap of 1 minute, 12.051 seconds, and he beat Max Verstappen by 0.043 seconds. Almost nothing. The kind of margin that separates a pole lap from second on a street circuit. George Russell, in the other Mercedes, qualified 6th, 0.394 seconds off his teammate, and admitted afterwards he had been bamboozled by the gap to a car that should have been identical to his. Charles Leclerc threw his Ferrari at the barriers chasing pole, crashed at back, and still lined up 4th. That is Monaco qualifying at its best. Knife-edge margins, drivers on the absolute limit, the walls inches away. And the drivers loved it. Lando Norris called them probably the most pure qualifying laps you have seen all year. Charles Leclerc said there were no energy thoughts during the lap, just full attack from start to finish. No managing the battery, no babysitting deployment, just a driver and a car against the clock. The racing felt more alive the moment the new technology was turned down. When your flagship feature improves the show by being switched off, that is not a small problem. That is the product telling you something. The complicated, expensive, heavily marketed future of Formula One worked best at Monaco when most of it was switched off. That is the story of the whole weekend in a single sentence. If this is the kind of Formula One breakdown you actually want, the stuff that digs into what is really going wrong this season, then subscribe, because this is what we do here every week. Now, while all of this was unfolding on track, a second story was building in the paddock, and it is the one that should worry Formula One the most. The verdict of the people actually driving these cars. Fernando Alonso has been racing in this sport for more than 2 decades. He has driven everything. After Monaco, he called this the worst generation of cars he has ever driven here. Then he went further. In his words, "It is just the rules. Hybrid cars should not be racing. It is as simple as that." And then the line that should echo around every room at the FIA, "No one is happy with the current cars." That is not a frustrated driver venting after a bad result. That is one of the most experienced racers alive, delivering a verdict on the entire concept. And he is not alone. Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion, described the 2026 cars as a clear step down in downforce and grip compared to the machinery he was racing here only a few years ago. Heavier feeling, less planted, less alive in the corners. This is not a one-weekend mood either. Max Verstappen has spent the whole season taking shots at these cars, comparing them at various points to Mario Kart and to Formula E on steroids. When the reigning benchmark driver is mocking the machinery race after race, that is not frustration, that is a verdict. The drivers are not describing a teething problem. They are describing cars they do not enjoy driving, on the circuit that is supposed to be the ultimate test of a driver. You can dismiss one unhappy driver as bitter. You cannot dismiss all of them. This is a paddock-wide verdict, and it is brutal. But drivers complain. That is part of the sport. The complaint only becomes a crisis when the people who wrote the rules start agreeing with them. And that is exactly what is happening. The FIA is already planning the escape route. There is now a serious public push to bring back naturally aspirated V8 engines before the end of the decade. The FIA president has stated plainly that the V8 is coming. Think about that timeline. These hybrid rules launched at the start of 2026, and the talk of replacing them is happening in the same season they debuted. The sport spent 4 years and a fortune designing this formula, convinced the manufacturers to sign up for it, and within months of it hitting the track, the conversation has already moved to how fast they can leave it behind. You do not plan the funeral while the patient is still in its first year, unless you already know something is wrong. A reversal like this is not cheap or easy. Engine rules exist to give teams years of stability to justify the enormous money they pour in. Reaching for a replacement this early means admitting the expensive new formula is not delivering what it promised. Governing bodies do not invite that kind of climb down in public unless the alternative, sticking with what they have, looks even worse. There is more to it than the long-term exit. The patches have already started. Through the opening rounds, the rules have been adjusted on the fly. Energy maps and procedures changed from race to race to manage problems the regulations created. Monaco's disabled Aero and muzzled battery are only the most visible example. This is a rulebook being repaired in real time. A finished product does not need this many emergency fixes in its first 6 weeks. So step back and look at the whole picture. The drivers say the cars are the worst they have raced. The governing body is already designing their replacement. The flagship technology had to be switched off at the showcase event, and the engines are stranding cars on track. That is not one bad weekend. That is a set of rules under pressure from every direction at once. The last piece of evidence is the one hiding in plain sight. The result itself. The whole promise of 2026 was a grid where anyone could win. Closer racing, unpredictability. What did Monaco actually produce? Kimi Antonelli put his Mercedes on pole and led every single lap. A lights-to-flag demolition, his 5th win in a row. At 19 years old, he became the youngest winner in the history of the Monaco Grand Prix, beating a record Lewis Hamilton set back in 2008. He scored a Grand Slam, pole, fastest lap, every lap led, and the win, the youngest driver ever to do it. It was a faultless drive. It was also the opposite of what these rules were sold to deliver. Because while a teenager disappeared into the distance, the 4-time world champion Max Verstappen sat in the garage, out on lap 1. Now 7th in the standings and 113 points behind the lead. The best driver of his generation, in the season that promised anyone could win, buried in 7th, a long way from a 19-year-old. One team has won the last 5 races. Antonelli leads the championship by 66 points after just 6 rounds. The grid where anyone could win has produced a runaway, and a season sold as the most open in years is already starting to look like a coronation. Lewis Hamilton took 2nd for Ferrari, his 2nd runner-up finish in a row, which lifted him to 2nd in the championship, 66 points behind Antonelli. A good day for Ferrari on paper. But even that came with an engine reality check delivered the same weekend, and it cuts right to the heart of what these rules were sold on. One of the biggest promises of 2026 was convergence. The engines were supposed to bunch up, the field was supposed to close, the gaps were supposed to shrink. Monaco was the first race run under a stricter engine test after the FIA changed the way it measures the compression ratio from the 1st of June, checking it both cold and hot to close a loophole Mercedes was suspected of exploiting. The fix landed, Mercedes won anyway, from pole, leading every lap. And then came the first official ranking of the engines, and it confirmed what the paddock already feared. Convergence did not happen. The ruling put the Red Bull powertrains unit on top, the strongest engine on the grid. Mercedes came out more than 2% down on it. Ferrari, Audi and Honda all landed more than 4% down, stuck in the bottom tier, and now handed extra development just to claw their way back. Hamilton said it plainly. Red Bull have the most powerful engine, Mercedes second, and then Ferrari are behind. That is the convergence the rules promised. Instead, it has produced a clear pecking order, a bottom tier already scrambling for catch-up upgrades, and a championship that looks close to settled after only 6 rounds. So where does that leave us? This was supposed to be the season that saved Formula One. Cleaner, closer, anyone's to win. And 6 races in, the sport disabled its showcase technology to survive Monaco. The drivers are calling the cars the worst they have raced. The engines are spread out instead of converged. The championship is turning into a procession, and the governing body is already drawing up the engines meant to replace all of it. Monaco did not break these rules, it just refused to hide them. The fragile starts, the stranded batteries, the cars the drivers do not trust, all of it was already there. The streets of Monte Carlo simply pulled back the curtain at the one event where the whole world was watching. The real question now is not whether the 2026 rules are in trouble. The people who built them have answered that by planning their replacement. The question is how long Formula One is willing to limp through an era it no longer believes in, and what shape the sport will be in by the time those V8s arrive to rescue it. The next few rounds will tell us whether Monaco was the low point or just a preview. Watch the energy failures, the engine rulings, and every quiet tweak the FIA slips into the rules from here. Because that is where the real story of this season is being written. If you want to follow it properly, race by race, with the takes that hold up after the dust settles, subscribe and stick around. The next one is already coming.